6 months after the Battle of Proxima Station, the war was over. Not because humanity had won individual fights, but because they had completely destroyed the idea that non-human species could control their own destiny in the galaxy. The great coalition of 12 species had been reduced to scattered groups of refugees begging for mercy from the same humans. They had tried to wipe out Admiral Seokjin Lim walked through the empty halls of the Galactic Federation's Council building on Nexus Prime, the massive chamber that had once hosted diplomatic meetings between dozens of species was now silent except for his footsteps echoing off the walls. Holographic displays around him showed the current status of every major alien civilization: defeated, surrendered, or transformed beyond recognition. The few surviving alien delegates had asked for this final meeting, hoping to negotiate some kind of peace treaty that would let them keep at least part of their independence. They still didn't understand that the war had never been about territory or resources. It had been about something much more basic and permanent. President Yoon Ji-baek's image appeared on the main screen, broadcasting from Earth to address the small group of alien representatives. Her words were calm and steady, but they carried the weight of absolute authority that came from speaking for the galaxy's new rulers. "You have asked for peace terms," she said, looking directly at each alien delegate. "But peace suggests that there were two equal sides fighting each other. That was never true. You thought our patience meant we were weak. You thought our diplomacy meant we had limits. You thought our mercy meant we couldn't be dangerous." The truth continued to unfold in waves that left the alien survivors struggling to understand. Humanity's advanced technology hadn't been developed recently at all. They had been holding back their real capabilities for thousands of years to avoid scaring other species into wars before the right time. The great filter that prevented most civilizations from becoming truly powerful wasn't a natural force. It was humanity making sure they remained the only species capable of real galactic control. Dr. Sung-wook Yoon, humanity's chief expert on alien biology, presented his final research reports to the shocked alien audience. Every species that had fought against humanity had been slowly changed by microscopic machines that had been introduced through normal medical aid, trade goods, and cultural exchanges over 50 years. The changes hadn't been noticed because they had been made gradually, carefully designed to look like natural improvements. "We didn't conquer you," Yoon explained patiently. "We upgraded you. Your violent instincts have been removed. Your need to fight over territory has been redirected toward exploration and creativity. Your ability to hurt other thinking beings has been eliminated at the genetic level. You are still yourselves, but you are better versions of yourselves." The Kalith delegation struggled to process this information. War Commander Thexkar, who had started this conflict by ordering the murder of human children, found that he could no longer understand why he had ever thought such actions were acceptable. The very idea of harming innocent people filled him with disgust. When he tried to remember his species' proud history of conquest and domination, he could only see it as a shameful period of pointless cruelty. The Vorthak representatives felt similar confusion. Their entire culture had been built around the idea that stronger races had the right to dominate weaker ones. Now those concepts seemed not just wrong, but impossible to understand. They found themselves genuinely interested in other species, eager to learn from them and work together rather than control them. Even the peaceful species that had joined the coalition discovered they had been changed. The botanical collective, who had fought against humans out of fear rather than aggression, found that their capacity for hatred and suspicion had been completely removed. They could no longer see other species as threats or competitors, only as potential friends and partners. The changes weren't limited to psychology and behavior. Humanity had been subtly modifying alien biology for decades, preparing for the day when direct control would become necessary. Every species now found that their bodies responded positively to human chemical signals, making them naturally want to trust and cooperate with humans. Their brain chemistry had been adjusted to make human voices sound more trustworthy and authoritative than their own leaders. Most remarkably, their reproductive systems had been modified so that future generations would be born with even stronger, cooperative instincts and weaker ability to think violent thoughts. Within a few generations, the galaxy's former warrior races would be completely unable to imagine harming another thinking being. General Young-sik Park revealed the philosophical framework behind humanity's actions. in what would become known as the Terran Doctrine, the new rules that would govern galactic civilization. You wondered why humans seemed so limited, so restricted by concepts like honor and mercy. He explained to the mixed crowd of aliens and humans. You never considered that these weren't restrictions. They were the tools we used to build a civilization strong enough to remake the galaxy the way we wanted it. The demonstration of humanity's true capabilities continued with revelations that amazed even the most advanced alien scientists. Human technology didn't just bend the laws of physics, it rewrote them whenever necessary. Matter could be converted into energy and back again at will. Time could be sped up or slowed down in small areas. Space could be folded to bring distant places together or stretched to create vast distances between nearby objects. But perhaps most impressive was humanity's mastery of consciousness itself. They had learned to transfer minds between bodies, store personalities in quantum computers, and even combine multiple minds into group intelligences when needed. Death had become optional for humans, while aging could be reversed whenever they wanted. They were, in every way that mattered, the closest thing to gods that the galaxy had ever seen. The new galactic order was announced from Earth with ceremonies broadcast to every inhabited world. The old Federation was dissolved, replaced by the Terran Commonwealth, a government structure that looked democratic, but was designed to ensure human oversight of all important decisions. Alien species were allowed to manage local affairs, but anything affecting multiple worlds required approval from human administrators. The results were immediately visible across the galaxy. Wars that had raged for centuries ended overnight, as the modified alien populations found themselves unable to sustain violent conflicts. Trade disputes were resolved through cooperation rather than competition. Scientific research accelerated dramatically as species that had guarded their secrets jealously began sharing freely with former enemies. Most remarkably, the galaxy began to heal from thousands of years of environmental damage caused by industrial warfare. Human terraforming technology, no longer limited by diplomatic restrictions, began restoring damaged worlds and creating new habitable planets faster than ever before. Species that had been driven nearly extinct by past conflicts found their populations growing rapidly in carefully managed environments. 1 year after the end of the war, representatives from across the galaxy gathered for the first Harmony Festival, a celebration of the new era of galactic cooperation. Former enemies worked together on art projects, scientific experiments, and cultural exchanges that would have been impossible under the old system. Ambassador Hyunwoo Kim, now serving as Terran governor of the Nexus sector, watched the festivities with quiet satisfaction. The same gentle smile he had worn during 50 years of diplomatic service was still on his face, but now it reflected genuine happiness rather than carefully maintained performance. The galaxy belonged to humanity now, not through conquest in the traditional sense, but through the patient application of superior intelligence, technology, and strategic thinking that spanned millions of years. The violent, chaotic galaxy of the past was remembered only in history books that most aliens could no longer bear to read, and in the deepest archives of human civilization, sealed away until they might be needed again, rested weapons and strategies that even the transformed aliens could never be allowed to know about. Because humanity had learned long ago that the greatest victory wasn't defeating your enemies, it was making sure they never realized they had been enemies at all. The aliens called it peace. The humans called it Tuesday. The Calith Dominion's response to their crushing defeat at Proxima Station was swift and desperate. Within days of the battle, they had contacted every species they had ever dealt with, called in every favor they were owed, and assembled the largest military alliance in galactic history. 12 different species united under one banner with a single terrifying goal: the complete extinction of humanity before these monsters could spread their deadly influence any further. The Vorthak Empire committed their entire war fleet of 3,000 heavy battle cruisers. The crystalline hegemony opened weapon vaults that had been sealed for centuries and pulled out ancient technologies they had sworn never to use again. Even the peaceful botanical collective, who had never fought a war in their 1,000-year history, contributed ships and soldiers to the cause. The message was clear across the galaxy. Humanity had become a threat so dangerous that every civilized species needed to work together to stop them. What none of them understood was that humans had been planning for this exact situation since the day they first made contact with alien life 50 years ago. General Kyung-soo, Han stepped out of the shadows where humanity's real military leadership had always hidden. While ambassadors and diplomats had played their public roles, and fleet admirals had commanded the ships that aliens were allowed to see, Han and his team had spent 5 decades preparing for the war they knew would eventually come. Han's first briefing to President Nam and the Human Leadership Council revealed the true scope of their preparations. Every diplomatic mission over the past 50 years had been a spy operation. Every trade agreement had been designed to map alien industrial capabilities. Every cultural exchange had identified weak points in alien society and government structures. "We never planned to become part of galactic civilization," Han explained to the stunned political leaders. "We've been studying it, learning how it works, mapping its resources, finding its weak spots. The Federation thought we were joining their community. In reality, we were preparing to take control of it." Agent Da Yun-yun received her activation orders while sitting in a small coffee shop on the Vorthak homeworld, where she had been working as a cultural researcher for 15 years. Around her, Vorthak citizens were celebrating the news of their species joining the Great Alliance against humanity. They had no idea that the quiet human woman who had been studying their poetry and music was actually one of thousands of intelligence agents embedded throughout alien space. Yoon's real mission began immediately. The Cultural Research Center where she worked was actually a sophisticated spy base that had been monitoring Vorthak military communications, government structures, and social weak points for over a decade. Within hours of receiving her orders, she had identified the perfect targets for humanity's first strikes against the Vorthak war machine. The same pattern repeated across the galaxy. Humans who had been living as peaceful traders, researchers, diplomats, and immigrants for decades suddenly revealed their true purpose. They weren't refugees seeking new homes or scientists satisfying curiosity about alien cultures. They were advanced scouts for humanity's conquest, and they had been in position long before anyone realized a war was coming. Dr. Jinny Kim made her most shocking discovery while examining ancient ruins on a crystalline hegemony world. The archaeological site had been considered one of the galaxy's greatest mysteries, the remains of an advanced civilization that had disappeared millions of years ago. But Kim's detailed analysis revealed traces of human DNA mixed into the genetic material found throughout the ruins. The implications were staggering. Humanity hadn't just been in space longer than anyone suspected. They had been guiding galactic development for millions of years. Every mysterious piece of ancient technology, every unexplained alien advancement, every lost civilization showed clear signs of human influence. The galaxy hadn't naturally evolved into its current form. It had been carefully shaped by humanity over vast periods of time. The revelation went far beyond simple technological guidance. Captain Minho Seo led the first deep strike missions into Kalith territory and discovered that human agents hadn't just been studying alien weaknesses, they had been creating them. Genetic changes introduced through medical aid programs over the decades had made certain alien species dependent on human-supplied treatments. Economic relationships that seemed beneficial to alien worlds had actually made them completely reliant on human trade networks. Even the political structures of some alien governments had been subtly influenced to make them easier to control when the time came. But the most devastating revelation came when something called the Terra Protocol activated across human space. This wasn't just military mobilization. It was the transformation of human civilization into its true form. Everything that aliens had seen of human society had been an elaborate performance designed to hide their real nature. The peaceful farming colonies were revealed to be training centers where human children learned combat skills disguised as agricultural work. The scientific research stations had been developing weapons technology that could reshape the laws of physics themselves. The cultural centers where humans studied art and philosophy had actually been strategic planning facilities, coordinating the eventual conquest of known space. Even human biology was different than anyone had realized. Dr. Young-Sik Park, humanity's chief military scientist, revealed that every human born in the past 50 years had been genetically optimized for combat effectiveness. Enhanced intelligence and perfect coordination with human technology. What aliens had thought were natural human traits, their adaptability, their problem-solving abilities, their teamwork skills, were actually the result of careful genetic engineering, programs that had been running for generations. The coalition forces launched their first coordinated attack, expecting to face an enemy that, while dangerous, was still limited by the same rules that governed all other galactic species. They assumed that humans, no matter how advanced, would still need to follow the same laws of physics, the same principles of warfare, and the same supply limitations that affected all military conflicts. They were completely wrong about everything. Human defensive systems activated throughout their territory, and the alien fleets found themselves fighting battles that violated every principle they understood about how wars were supposed to work. Human ships didn't just have better weapons. They seemed to exist partially outside normal space and time, making them nearly impossible to target while allowing them to attack from directions that shouldn't have been possible. Human soldiers didn't just have superior training, they appeared to share a collective mind that allowed them to coordinate with perfect efficiency across vast distances. When coalition forces managed to capture human prisoners, they discovered that the captives continued to receive and send information through biological systems that no alien scientist could understand or explain. Most disturbing of all, human civilian populations didn't act like civilians at all. When coalition forces occupied human colonies, expecting to find defenseless farmers and families, they instead encountered populations that had been transformed into perfect guerrilla warfare units. Children barely old enough to walk were equipped with weapons and tactics that let them eliminate trained alien soldiers. Elderly humans who appeared weak and helpless turned out to be devastating fighters who could disable enemy vehicles with simple tools. The Vorthak Empire fell first. Their homeworld defense fleet was destroyed not by superior firepower, but by their own ships turning against them. Human agents who had been embedded in Vorthak society for decades activated hidden programs in their military computer systems, converting the entire enemy fleet into unwilling allies. The Vorthak government found themselves under attack by their own forces, with no way to regain control of their military. The crystalline hegemony lasted slightly longer, but their defeat was even more complete. Human scientists had been studying crystalline biology through cultural exchange programs for 20 years. When the war began, they released specially designed tiny machines that didn't destroy crystalline bodies. They reprogrammed them. The entire species found themselves thinking human thoughts, following human goals, and working toward human victory, while believing they were still fighting for their own independence. As coalition after coalition fell to human forces, a desperate message reached all surviving alien species simultaneously. The transmission came from sources throughout the galaxy: diplomatic archives, scientific databases, historical records that had been hidden for millions of years. This was never their first contact with galactic civilization. This was their final test, and we just gave them permission to pass. The Battle of Proxima Station was supposed to be humanity's final defeat. War Commander Thexkar brought 40,000 Kalith warships to the small mining system, the largest invasion fleet ever assembled in galactic history. The crystal vessels stretched across space in formations that could be seen from neighboring star systems. Against this overwhelming force, humanity had positioned only 8,000 ships around the remote mining station. Thexkar studied the tactical displays with satisfaction. His forces outnumbered the humans 5-1. Even with their advanced technology, they couldn't possibly survive such crushing numerical superiority. This battle would break human resistance once and for all, and the rest of their worlds would surrender without a fight. But something was wrong with the human fleet formation. Thexkar had studied every major battle humans had fought over 50 years. Their ships always took defensive positions, using superior technology and careful tactics to protect themselves while disabling enemy vessels with minimal force. They fought like doctors performing surgery, precise, controlled, always trying to save lives. The ships waiting at Proxima Station looked nothing like the elegant vessels of the Federation Navy. These were black, angular hunters that seemed to swallow light rather than reflect it. They moved with deadly grace that suggested they were built for killing rather than peacekeeping. Most disturbing of all, they were arranged in attack formation, not the careful defensive patterns that had made humans famous throughout the galaxy. Commander Woojin Park led the first wave of human fighters toward the approaching Kalith fleet. His squadron had volunteered for what everyone assumed would be a suicide mission, buying time for civilian evacuations with their lives. But Park felt no fear as he accelerated toward the enemy. For the first time in his 20-year military career, he had been given permission to fight without limits. The rules that had controlled human military action for 50 years were simple: protect civilians, minimize casualties, offer surrender terms, provide medical aid to wounded enemies. Those rules had been canceled 6 hours ago. In their place was a single order that made Park smile with dark anticipation: win. The lead Kalith dreadnought opened fire as soon as the human fighters came within range. Massive energy beams that could vaporize small moons lanced out toward Park's squadron. He should have ordered evasive maneuvers. He should have used his superior speed to avoid the attack. He should have followed every rule of space combat he had learned in decades of military service. Instead, he flew directly into the enemy fire. The energy beam struck Park's fighter with enough force to destroy a city. His squadron watched in amazement as the devastating blast were absorbed by his ship's hull without causing visible damage. The black armor seemed to drink the destructive energy and somehow convert it into power for his own weapon systems. Park's response was immediate and terrible. His fighter launched a single missile that struck the Kalith dreadnought in the center. The massive enemy vessel didn't just explode. It began to dissolve at the molecular level, breaking apart into basic atoms that scattered harmlessly into space. 50,000 Kalith crew members simply stopped existing. Across the battlefield, the same pattern repeated. Major Hyojin Kim piloted bomber squadrons in direct assault runs that ignored every principle of fighter tactics. Her ships absorbed enemy fire that should have been instantly deadly, then responded with weapons that didn't just destroy their targets, they erased them from reality. Enemy vessels that had dominated star systems for centuries were reduced to clouds of drifting particles in seconds. The Kalith fleet tried to adapt to these impossible tactics, but they were fighting an enemy they couldn't understand. Colonel Jae-sung led boarding parties that attacked enemy ships using strategies that violated every law of space warfare. His soldiers didn't just capture enemy vessels. They converted them into human warships during the middle of battle, turning the Kalith's own fleet against them. Thexakar watched his forces being systematically destroyed and felt something he had never experienced before: pure terror. These weren't the same humans who had spent 50 years showing mercy to defeated enemies. These were apex predators who fought with cold efficiency that made the Kalith look like children playing war. The true horror began when humanity deployed what Dr. Sumin Lee called the weapons we hoped we'd never need. Technologies that had been developed in secret, tested in hidden facilities, and stored away in the desperate hope that they would never be used. Microscopic machines were released into space that sought out enemy ships and began converting their crews into thinking computers for human artificial intelligence systems. Kalith soldiers found themselves speaking human languages, thinking human thoughts, and fighting for human victory even while their bodies remained unchanged. Mental warfare beams that had been perfected over decades of peaceful research were turned on enemy fleets. Entire crews became convinced that they had always been human allies, that their own species were the real invaders, that their duty was to surrender immediately and beg for forgiveness. Reality-bending weapons changed the fundamental laws of physics around enemy ships. Kalith vessels found themselves trapped in bubbles of space where their weapons couldn't function, their engines couldn't operate, and their life support systems failed according to rules that shouldn't have existed. But the most shocking moment came when Admiral Choi activated something called the Orpheus Protocol. Suddenly, every piece of human technology throughout the galaxy revealed its true nature. Peaceful colony ships that had been exploring distant worlds for decades transformed into mobile battle fortresses. Trade vessels that had been carrying supplies between friendly systems activated hidden weapon systems that exceeded military specifications. Civilian research stations became fortress worlds that could withstand attacks by entire enemy fleets. Most terrifying of all, every human civilian pulled military-grade weapons from hidden storage areas and began systematic elimination of Kalith forces throughout known space. The elderly grandmother who had been peacefully tending her garden that morning was suddenly equipped with power armor and energy weapons that let her fight trained enemy soldiers. The children who had been playing games in parks were revealed to have been receiving combat training disguised as fun, activities, and sports. The galaxy watched in stunned silence as humanity's true nature was finally revealed. They weren't peaceful farmers who had been forced into war by circumstances. They were the ultimate hunters who had been wearing masks of civilization while preparing for the day when those masks would no longer be necessary. War Commander. Thexkar sent a desperate message to his homeworld as his fleet burned around him. They weren't hiding their military strength. They are a military force. Every human is a soldier. Their entire civilization is a weapon pointed at the galaxy. The response from the Calith Dominion was swift and predictable. If humanity was this dangerous, then they had to be completely destroyed before they could spread their influence any further. Every ally, every subject race, every species that owed the Calith a favor would be called upon to join a grand alliance dedicated to the total extinction of humanity. It was exactly what humans had been counting on for 50 years, as the last Calith ship at Proxima Station was converted into scattered atoms. Admiral Choi received reports from across the galaxy. Human agents who had been living as peaceful traders, diplomats, and researchers for decades were activating throughout alien space. The real war was just beginning. And for the first time in their history, humanity was ready to show the galaxy what they had really been building, while everyone else had been playing politics and fighting small wars over territory and resources. The gentle giants had removed their masks. What the aliens saw underneath would haunt their nightmares forever. The attack began without warning at sunrise on New Seoul. Admiral Dong-hyun Choi was drinking his morning coffee on the bridge of the UES Harmony when the emergency signals started, flooding in from 3 human worlds. The view screen lit up with feeds from New Seoul, Busan Colony, and Jeju Station. All peaceful farming worlds where families grew crops and children played in meadows. The Calith fleet had appeared in orbit around all 3 planets at exactly the same time. There were no demands broadcast, no surrender terms offered, no warnings given to civilian populations. The crystal ship simply opened fire on every building they could see from space. Choi watched in silence as the first hospital exploded in a ball of orange flame. The children's wing had been full of sick kids receiving treatment. They died instantly, along with the doctors and nurses trying to help them. The next blast hit an elementary school during morning classes. 300 students between the ages of 5 and 10 were vaporized while they sat at their desks learning about mathematics. The bridge crew stared at the screens in shocked silence. This was not how wars were supposed to begin. Even the most aggressive species in the galaxy gave warnings before attacking civilian targets. They made demands. They offered terms. They gave people time to evacuate. The Calith were simply murdering everyone they could find. Captain Mi Kyung-yang, who commanded the Special Operations Division, looked at Admiral Choi with confusion. "Sir, shouldn't we scramble the nearest fleets? We need to get rescue ships to those worlds immediately." But Choi said nothing. He stood perfectly still, watching the screens as his people died. A refugee ship marked with red medical crosses tried to evacuate wounded civilians from New Seoul. The Calith targeted it specifically because of those crosses, destroying it and the 1,000 injured people inside. On Busan Colony, emergency workers rushed to help survivors of the first attack. The Calith waited for the rescue teams to gather around the damaged buildings, then hit them with a second wave of bombs. The people trying to save lives died alongside the people they were trying to help. For 17 minutes, Admiral Choi remained completely silent while chaos erupted around him. Communication officers received desperate pleas for help from the dying worlds. Tactical officers identified Calith ship positions and prepared attack plans. Medical officers calculated how many supply ships would be needed to treat the survivors. All of them waited for their admiral to give orders. All of them expected the standard human response: careful planning, precise action, maximum aid to civilians, minimum risk to their own forces. When Choi finally spoke, his voice was different. The warm, fatherly tone that had made him beloved throughout the Federation was gone. In its place was something cold and sharp. "Send word to all human fleets," he said quietly. "Recall every ship, every soldier, every weapon we have scattered across Federation space. Bring them all home immediately." Yang stepped forward, confused. "Sir, are we retreating from the colonies?" Choi turned to look at her and Yang involuntarily stepped backward. Something had changed in his eyes. They looked older, as if years of carefully hidden knowledge had suddenly risen to the surface. "No, Captain," he said. "We're bringing everyone home so they can witness what happens when someone declares war on humanity by murdering our children." The recall order went out across the galaxy within minutes. Human ships began abandoning their posts and setting course for home. Federation allies watched in confusion as their human partners suddenly left without explanation. Peace negotiations were abandoned in the middle of crucial talks. Trade missions packed up and departed overnight. Diplomatic posts were evacuated without notice. The Federation Council called an emergency session within hours. Representatives from dozens of species demanded to know why humanity was withdrawing from all galactic affairs during such a crisis. They needed human negotiators to coordinate the response to Kalith aggression. They needed human peacekeeping fleets to protect vulnerable worlds. They needed human wisdom to find a peaceful solution. President Seung Ho Nam appeared on the Council's main screen to address the assembled delegates. The aliens expected his usual approach: measured words, careful diplomacy, requests for cooperation and mutual support. Instead, they heard 12 words that would echo through galactic history. The gentle phase of human civilization ended 6 hours ago. War it is. The transmission continued with footage that stunned every species in the Federation. The feeds showed massive industrial complexes across human worlds, facilities that aliens had always believed were for peaceful manufacturing. Factories that made farming equipment were transforming before their eyes into weapons production centers. Research stations that studied plant diseases were revealed to have military applications that defied understanding. Dr. Sumin Lee appeared on screen from what had been introduced as an agricultural research facility on Mars. Behind her, enormous machines were building devices that didn't match any known technology in Federation databases. "For 50 years," she said calmly, "we have maintained factories and research centers with hidden military purposes. Every civilian facility was designed to become a weapons plant when needed. We hoped this day would never come. The Kalith have made that hope impossible." The footage revealed the true scale of human preparation. Space stations that had appeared to be simple communication relays were actually weapons platforms capable of destroying entire fleets. Mining operations that had seemed focused on rare metals were producing materials for weapons that bent physics itself. Even the peaceful exploration ships that humans used for scientific research were equipped with military hardware that surpassed anything in the Federation arsenal. But the most shocking revelation came from the 3 attacked colonies. Emergency broadcasts showed something impossible. There were survivors. Not just a few people hiding in basements, but entire cities that had somehow survived orbital bombardment that should have turned the planets into glass. The cities were protected by defense systems that had been hidden underground for decades. Energy shields that could stop planet-killing weapons. Automated gun platforms that rose from beneath farms and parks. Civilian shelters that could house millions of people for years. The defenseless farming colonies had been military fortresses all along. As Federation sensors detected the true scope of human capabilities, alarms began sounding across command centers throughout the galaxy. Energy readings unlike anything in their databases. Weapon signatures that shouldn't have been possible. Fleet movements that suggested humanity had been hiding their true military size for generations. War Commander Thexkar received intelligence reports with growing concern. His spies throughout Federation space confirmed the impossible. Humanity had been preparing for total war while pretending to be peaceful farmers and diplomats. Every human world had been quietly fortified. Every human ship carried hidden weapons. Every human civilian had received military training disguised as normal education. The death toll from his attack had reached 2.4 billion humans in the first 6 hours. But instead of the panicked surrender he had expected, humanity was mobilizing for something that looked like the largest military operation in galactic history. As Kalith forces prepared for their next strike, Thexkar received a message directly from Earth. It contained only coordinates in space and a time exactly 24 hours in the future. Below the location data were 3 simple words: "Come and take it." The coordinates marked a small star system called Proxima, a mining operation with light defenses and minimal strategic value. It seemed like an obvious trap, But Thexakar smiled with anticipation. Perhaps the humans were finally ready to abandon their pretense of mercy and honor. Perhaps they would fight like real warriors instead of hiding behind their moral restrictions. He had no idea that humanity was about to show the galaxy what they had really been hiding behind that mask of civilization for 50 years. Their mercy and honor hadn't been weaknesses at all. They had been the chains that kept something far more dangerous locked away. Those chains had just been broken. Hyunwoo Kim walked slowly through the great halls of the Federation Council building. His black uniform was neat and clean, and his face showed the calm smile that had become famous across 50 star systems. All around him, strange creatures from distant worlds went about their daily work. Some had scales like snakes, others had fur like cats, and a few looked like walking diamonds. But they all treated him the same way, with respect and mild curiosity about the peaceful humans. Humans had been part of the Galactic Federation for 50 years now. In all that time, they had proven themselves to be excellent at solving problems between different species. When two alien races fought over territory, human negotiators would find ways to make both sides happy. When trade disputes arose, human economists would create deals that benefited everyone. When wars threatened to break out, human peacekeepers would step in with solutions that avoided bloodshed. The council chamber was buzzing with activity as Kim entered. Today's meeting was about another border dispute between the Vorthak Empire and the Crystalline Hegemony. Both sides had been arguing for months about who had the right to mine a distant star system. The minerals there were valuable, and neither side wanted to give up their claim. As usual, they had asked for human help to solve the problem. Kim took his seat next to Captain So-Young Park, who commanded the human peacekeeping fleet. She was known throughout the galaxy for her gentle approach to military problems. When pirates attacked merchant ships, her forces would disable the pirate vessels and then offer medical help to the wounded attackers. When enemy fleets threatened human colonies, she would broadcast warnings and give the attackers time to leave before fighting back. Even then, she would use the smallest amount of force necessary to drive them away. The meeting began with both sides presenting their arguments. The Vorthak representative was a tall creature with green scales and sharp teeth. He spoke angrily about his people's ancient right to the disputed system. The crystalline delegate looked like a person made of living glass, and she responded with equally strong words about her species' need for the rare minerals found there. Kim listened patiently to both sides. He had heard similar arguments hundreds of times before. After 2 hours of heated debate, he stood up and raised his hand for silence. "My friends," he said in his calm, steady voice, "I think we can find a solution that helps both your peoples. The system has many planets. What if we divide them between you? The Vorthak can mine the outer worlds while the crystallines take the inner ones. Both sides get what they need and no one has to fight." The two delegates looked at each other. It was a simple idea, but it made sense. After some discussion with their governments, they agreed to Kim's proposal. Another potential war had been prevented through human wisdom and patience. This scene had played out countless times over the decades. Humans seemed to have endless patience for solving other people's problems. They never used force unless they had no other choice, and even then, they always tried to minimize damage and save lives. Their military forces were powerful, but they used that power carefully and sparingly. Dr. Jihi Chang was another example of typical human behavior. She worked as the Federation's leading expert on alien cultures and military ethics. Her research, on proper conduct in war between species, was required reading in military schools across the galaxy. She argued that violence should always be the last option, and that even in war there were rules that must be followed to protect innocent people. When the Federation faced its first major war in decades against an aggressive species called the Vorthak, humans had volunteered to lead the combined military response. General Tae-Min Lee commanded the Federation forces using tactics that surprised many alien military leaders. Instead of massive attacks designed to crush the enemy quickly, he used careful psychological warfare and weapons that disabled enemy ships without killing their crews. Lee would broadcast messages to enemy soldiers explaining the reasons for the conflict and offering them safe passage home if they surrendered. He made sure that wounded enemies received medical treatment. He protected civilian populations even when it made military operations more difficult. His forces would often capture enemy positions and then rebuild the damaged infrastructure to help local populations. The war ended with surprisingly few casualties on both sides. The Morthak were defeated, but their society remained stable. Many of their former soldiers actually joined Federation peacekeeping forces afterward, impressed by the honor and mercy that humans had shown during the fighting. This pattern of human behavior had been consistent for half a century. They were tough when they needed to be, but they always showed kindness to defeated enemies. They had powerful weapons, but they used them carefully and only when necessary. They could be hard negotiators, but they always made sure their opponents could accept the final deal without losing face. The alien species of the Federation had come to see humans as the moral conscience of the galaxy. They were the ones who reminded everyone else to fight fairly, to protect civilians, to show mercy to prisoners, and to look for peaceful solutions whenever possible. Some species found this annoying, but most respected humans for their ethical leadership. The Kalith Dominion had been watching human behavior for years with growing interest. They were a warlike species that believed in conquest through pure brutality. Their philosophy was simple: the strong should dominate the weak, and showing mercy was a sign of weakness. They had conquered 12 star systems by completely destroying any resistance and enslaving entire populations. War Commander Thexkar studied intelligence reports about human military capabilities with his senior officers. The data showed that humans had advanced technology and well-trained soldiers, but they were limited by their strange moral codes. They always gave warnings before attacking. They always offered surrender terms. They always tried to avoid harming civilians. They always provided medical aid to wounded enemies. "Look at this," Thexkar said, pointing to a battle report from the Morthak War. The humans had the enemy fleet completely surrounded. They could have destroyed every ship in minutes. Instead, they used non-lethal weapons to disable the vessels and then offered medical help to the crews. What kind of warriors show such weakness? His officers made clicking sounds with their mouths, the Kalith way of laughing. One of them, Sub-Commander Veltar, spoke up. "Perhaps we should consider the human worlds as our next target, War Commander. Most Federation worlds are well defended, but the human colonies are protected by these soft warriors who care more about honor than victory." Thexkar's eyes gleamed with predatory satisfaction. Yes, their strength comes from their advanced technology and training, but their weakness comes from their hearts. They care too much about innocent lives. They worry too much about fighting fairly. They are powerful, but they chain themselves with foolish ideas about honor and mercy. Over the following months, the Kalith began preparing for their largest military operation in decades. They would test human resolve by attacking the most defenseless targets possible, civilian colonies with no military value. They wanted to see if humans would still fight with restraint when their own children were being murdered. The Kalith fleet assembled at the edge of human space, ready to show these peaceful humans what real war looked like. Thexkar prepared his final message to Earth, knowing that it would be broadcast across all Federation channels. "Your mercy is your weakness," he transmitted. "Your honor is your chains. We will break both, and then we will break you." The message was received at Federation headquarters on Earth. Ambassador Kim read it with the same calm expression he had worn for 50 years of diplomatic service. But for just a moment, something flickered in his eyes, something that no alien had ever seen in a human face before. The gentle phase of human civilization was about to end.